Hello, everybody. You're reading with Jimmy. This is Jimmy, and we're reading Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. This is Chapter 10, The Lobster Quadrille. Okay? Chapter 10. Here we go. The Mock Turtle sighed deeply and drew the back of one flapper across his eyes. He looked at Alice and tried to speak, but for a minute or two, sobs choked his voice. "That's the same as he had a bone in his throat," said the Gryphon, and he set to work shaking him and punching him in the back. Last, the Mock Turtle recovered his voice, and with tears running down his cheeks, he went on again. "You may not have lived much under the sea." "I haven't," said Alice. "And perhaps you were never even introduced to a lobster." Alice began to say, "I once tasted," but then she checked herself hastily and said, "No, never." "So you can have no idea what a delightful thing a lobster quadrille is." "No, indeed," said Alice. What sort of dance is it?" "Why," said the Gryphon, "you first form into a line along the seashore." "Two lines," cried the Mock Turtle. "Seals, turtles, salmon, and so on. Then, when you've cleared all the jellyfish out of the way—" "That generally takes some time," interrupted the Gryphon. "You advance twice, each with the lobster as a partner," cried the Gryphon. "Of course," the Mock Turtle said. "Advance twice, set to partners, change lobsters, and retire in the same order," continued the Gryphon. "Then, the Mock Turtle went on, "you throw the lobsters," shouted the Gryphon, with a bound into the air, "as far as you can into the sea." "Swim after them," screamed the Gryphon. "Turn a somersault in the sea," cried the Mock Turtle, capering wildly about. "Change lobsters again," yelled the Gryphon at the top of his voice. "Back to land again. And that's all the first figure," said the Mock Turtle, suddenly dropping his voice. And the two creatures, who had been jumping about like mad all this time, sat down again, very sadly and quietly, and looked at Alice. "It must be a pretty dance," said Alice timidly. "Would you like to see a little of it?" said the Mock Turtle. "Very much indeed," said Alice. "Come. Let's try the first figure," said the Mock Turtle to the Gryphon. We can do it without lobsters, Which shall sing?" "Oh, you sing," said the Gryphon. "I've forgotten the words." So they began solemnly dancing around and around. Alice, every now and then treading on her toes, they passed too close and waving their forepaws to mark the time when the Mock Turtle sang this very slowly and sadly. "Will you walk a little faster?" said a whiting to a snail. "There's a porpoise close behind us, and he's treading on my tail. See how eagerly the lobsters and the turtles all advance. They're waiting on the shingle. Will you come and join the dance? Will you, won't you, will you, won't you, will you join the dance? Will you, won't you, will you, won't you join the dance?" Top of page 108. Here we go. "You really can have no notion how delightful it will be when they take us up and throw us with the lobsters out to sea." But the snail replied, "Too far, too far," and gave a look askance, said he thanked the whiting kindly, but he would not join the dance. Would not, could not, would not, could not join the dance. Would not, could not, would not, could not join the dance. "What matters it how far we go," his scaly friend replied. "The further off from England, the nearer is to France. There's another shore, upon the other side." Then turn not pale, beloved snail, and come and join the dance. Will you, won't you, will you, won't you, will you join the dance? Will you, won't you, will you, won't you, will you join the dance? Thank you. It's a very interesting dance to watch, Alice said, feeling very glad that it was over at last. And I do so like that curious song about the whiting. Oh, as to the whiting, said the Mock Turtle, you've seen them, of course. Oh, yes, said Alice. I've seen them at... She checked herself hastily. I don't know where Din may be, said the Mock Turtle, but if you like them so often... Okay, of course, you know what they're like, right? I believe so, Alice replied thoughtfully. They have their tails in their mouths, and they're all over crumbs. You're wrong about the crumbs, said the Mock Turtle. Crumbs would all wash off into the sea. But they have their tails in their mouths. And the reason is, and here the Mock Turtle yawned and shut his eyes. Tell her the reason for all that, he said to the Gryphon. The reason, said the Gryphon, they would go with the lobsters to the dance, and so they got thrown out to sea, and so they had to fall a long way. So they got their tails fast in their mouths, and so they couldn't get them out again, and that's all. Thank you, said Alice. That's very interesting. I never knew so much about a whiting before. I can tell you more than that if you like, said the Gryphon. Do you know why it's called a whiting? I never thought about it, said Alice. Why? It does the boots and shoes, the Gryphon replied very solemnly. Alice was thoroughly puzzled. Does the boots and shoes? She repeated in a wondering tone. Why, what are your shoes done with? Said the Gryphon. I mean, what makes them so shiny? Alice looked down at them and considered a little before she gave her answer. Well, they're done with blacking, I believe. Boots and shoes under the sea, the Gryphon went on in a deep voice, are done with whiting, and now you know. And what are they made of? Alice asked in a tone of great curiosity. Well, soles and eels, of course, the Gryphon replied rather impatiently. Any shrimp could have told you that. Well, if I had been a whiting, said Alice, whose thoughts were still running on the song, I would have said to the porpoise, keep back, please. We don't want you with us. They are obliged to have him with them, the Mock Turtle said. No fish would go anywhere without a porpoise. Wouldn't it really, said Alice. Sorry, let me just adjust this. In a tone of great surprise. Wouldn't it really? Of course not, said the Mock Turtle. Why, if a fish came to me and told me he was going on a journey, I would say, with what purpose? You mean purpose, said Alice. I mean what I say, the Mock Turtle replied in an offended tone. And the Gryphon added, come, let's hear some of your adventures. I could tell you my adventures beginning from this morning, said Alice a little timidly, but it's no use going back to yesterday because I was a different person. Explain that, said the Mock Turtle. No. Adventures first, said the Gryphon in an impatient tone. Explanations take such a dreadful time. So Alice began telling them of her adventures from the time when she first saw the White Rabbit. She was a little nervous about it just at first. The two creatures got so close to her, one on each side, and they opened their eyes and mouths so very wide. But she gained courage as she went on. Her listeners were perfectly quiet until she got to the part about her repeating, "You are old Father William," to the caterpillar, and the words all coming out different. And then the Mock Turtle drew a long breath and said, "That's very curious." "It's all about as curious as it can be," said the Gryphon. It all came different?" the Mock Turtle repeated thoughtfully. I should like to hear her try and repeat something now. Tell her to begin." He looked at the Gryphon as if he thought that Somehow he had the authority over Alice. "Stand up and repeat, 'tis the voice of the sluggard," said the Gryphon. How these creatures ordered one about and make one repeat lessons, thought Alice. I might just as well be at school at once. But, however, she got up and began to repeat, but in her head it was so full of the Lobster Quadrille that she hardly knew what she was saying. And the words came very queer indeed. "The voice of the lobster, I heard him declare, 'You have baked me too brown, I must sugar my hair.' As a duck with his eyelids, so he with his nose trim his belt and his buttons and turns out his toes. And when the sands are all dry, he is gay as a lark, and will talk in a contemptuous tones of the shark. But when the tide rises and the sharks are around, his voice has a timid and tremulous sound." "That's different from what I used to say when I was a child," said the Gryphon. "Well, I never heard it before," said the Mock Turtle, "but it sounds uncommon nonsense." Alice said nothing. She sat down with her face in her hands, wondering if anything would ever happen in a natural way again. "I should like to have it explained," said the Mock Turtle. "She can't explain it," said the Gryphon hastily. "Go on with the next verse." But what about the toes?" the Mock Turtle persisted. How could he turn them out with his nose, you know?" "It's the first position in dancing," Alice said. But she was dreadfully puzzled by the whole thing and longed to change the subject. "Go on with the next verse," the Gryphon repeated. It begins, "I passed by his garden." Alice did not dare disobey, though she felt it would all come wrong, and she went on in a trembling voice. "I passed by his garden and marked with one eye how the owl and the panther were sharing a pie. The panther took pie crust, gravy, and meat, while the owl had the dish as its share of the treat. And when the pie was all finished, the owl, as a boon, was kindly permitted to pocket the spoon, while the panther received the knife and the fork with a growl and concluded the banquet by—" "What is the use of repeating all that stuff?" the Mock Turtle interrupted, "if you don't explain it as you go? It's by far the most confusing thing I've ever heard." "Yes, I think you better leave off," said the Gryphon, and Alice was only too glad to do so. "Shall we try another figure of the Lobster Quadrille?" said the Gryphon, went on. "Or would you like the Mock Turtle to sing you another song?" "Please, a song, please, if the Mock Turtle would be so kind," Alice replied, so eagerly that the Gryphon said in a rather offended tone, "There's no accounting for tastes. Okay, sing her the turtle soup, would you, old fellow?" The Mock Turtle sighed deeply and began in a voice choked with sobs to sing this. "Beautiful soup, so rich and green, waiting in the hot tureen. Who for such dainties would not stoop? Soup of the evening, beautiful soup. Soup of the evening, beautiful soup. Beautiful soup, beautiful soup. Soup of the evening, beautiful, beautiful soup. Beautiful soup. Who cares for fish, game, or any other dish? Who would not give all else for 2 pennyworth of beautiful soup? Pennyworth only for beautiful soup. Beautiful soup, beautiful soup. Soup of the evening, beautiful, beautiful soup." "Chorus again," cried the Gryphon, and the Mock Turtle had just begun to repeat it when the cry of "The trial's beginning! The trial's beginning!" was heard in the distance. "Come on!" cried the Gryphon, and Alice grabbed her by the hand, hurried off without waiting for the end. What's the trial all about?" Alice panted as she ran. Let's get up here. But the Gryphon only answered, "Come on!" and ran the faster, while more and more faintly came carried on the breeze that followed them the melancholy words, "Soup of the evening, beautiful, beautiful soup." Thanks for visiting. That was the entire chapter 10, the Lobster Quadrille. Look for our video analysis of this chapter to gain additional insights. You're reading with Jimmy. This is Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. That was chapter 10. Email me with any questions, comments, critiques, Jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com, Jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com. Thank you so much for listening.